There's a quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes that I like. A mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions again. As someone who loves learning and loves experiencing new things, I can attest to that being true. And even more so, it is true of faith and our journey with God. He has very creative and surprising ways to stretch the limits of our trust in Him and our belief in who He is and what He speaks over us. One of the ways that my faith has been stretched in the past and is being joyfully, while somewhat painstakingly stretched now, is through the revelations of miracles. In my young adults group at my church, we've just finished a series by Mark Batterson called The Grave Robber: How Jesus Can Make Your Impossible Possible. It's all about the 7 miracles in the book of John, and through the miracles it intimately reveals God's mastery over every aspect of our lives, over space and time, over death itself. I've read the book that the series is based on before, and in rereading it over these last several weeks with my mom, my faith was stretched even further than it had been during my initial read-through of it about a year and a half ago. I'm sure that the series blessed a lot of people, but it definitely felt like it was handpicked by God, at least for me. And in the learning and relearning about miracles, Jesus turning water into wine, Jesus walking on water, Jesus healing people who were crippled or were blind from birth, and finally, Jesus calling a dead man back to life again. It made me remember the miracles that He has already done in my life. Because these aren't far-fetched fairy tales. These aren't some ancient myths that we turn to for comfort. God is the real deal, and He didn't just perform miracles in the past, He's still doing them now. And God specializes in every sort of mind-boggling miracle that He can think of, but I think He has a special place in His sovereign heart for miracles of healing. He is the God who longs to make us well. Whether it's a physical sickness or malady, or a mental struggle, or spiritual strongholds, or broken relationships, or broken faith, He can and does heal all that and more. He makes the deaf hear, the blind see, the dead live. He makes the lost found and turns sinners into saints. And He has done plenty of healing miracles in my life so far. And I want to tell you about just one of them. When I was 11, several weeks before Easter, I noticed that I was getting these little red dots all around my ankles, and over the next couple weeks they started getting larger and moving further up my legs. My parents had no idea what was going on, so they took me to the doctors, and the diagnosis turned out to be kind of rare and scary. The red dots that I was seeing were called petechiae. They were micro hemorrhages in the capillary beds of my legs. And they were the forerunners of what was going to become leukemia. Obviously, my parents were pretty freaked out about it, and I had no idea what was going on. I didn't find out about this until many years later, what it was. All I knew was that they made my legs look ugly, and I wanted to look pretty in my new Easter dress. So, a week before Easter, I asked my mom if she would pray that the dots would go away so I could wear my Easter dress the following week. Of course, my family had been praying for me, but as weird as it sounds, my parents hadn't thought of the simplicity of just asking God to make them go away. They hadn't actually prayed that. But my mom and I prayed right there and then that God would take them away by Easter. So we had a week, and I had hundreds of them all up and down my legs. By Good Friday, there were 2, and I got to wear my dress. When my parents took me back to the doctors again, there was no medical explanation for it. In fact, the doctor said that we should watch out for them to come back over the next 2 years, but they never did. God heals, and He heals miraculously. And remembering what He has already done has been inspiring me to trust in Him for bigger things, to pray bolder prayers, to ask for more audacious miracles. And honestly, it's kind of freaky. And lately, I think I've been asking for too much. But the thing about God is, He's God. Nothing is too big for him. And I can't impose my limited perspective and power and control over his fathomless sovereignty. Just because I see a miracle as big or small doesn't mean that God sets a size to it. If he is infinite, which he is, then all of my finite desires and prayers are equal in his perspective. There's no big or small to him. It's all the same because he can do anything. So it's a really cool journey with him. And he has awesome and surprising ways of speaking to me and encouraging me along the way as I seek him and ask for his abundant blessing in miracles that are definitely out of my control to manufacture. Just a week ago, I was talking to my mom about what God had been speaking to me, which was wonderful and inspiring and backed up with scripture and just great. But I was finding it really hard to believe because it was so insanely good. So I was telling my mom, I have no doubt that God can do anything. He can heal anything. He can restore anything. But I was so stuck on how. How could God pull off this thing that to me seemed so huge? How could he do it in the time frame that I believed he would? How would God deliver on his promise, essentially? And you know, God isn't daunted by our questions. Our uncertainties don't diminish his power. In his brilliant wisdom and timing, he answered my angsty questions. Just a few hours later, I was having my devotions during my lunch break. And by divine happenstance, my devotions put me in Numbers 11 that day, where God hears the grumbling of the Israelites about not having any meat to eat. And God says that he will send them a month's worth of meat. Now, try to wrap your heads around this. This is a big deal. God isn't saying that he's going to just pop over to the local market basket and visit the deli. This is a huge claim he's making. The Bible records 600,000 Israelite men. And that means that there are over 1 million men, women, and children in the middle of the desert. And God is claiming to provide meat for all of them. Enough meat for a month. So no wonder that Moses' response is, God, how are you going to do that? Sure, there were the 10 plagues, and the Red Sea parted, and you saved us from the Egyptians, and yeah, I guess there was that tasty manna. But meat? Is there going to be enough if flocks and herds are slaughtered? Would there be enough for all of us if all the fish in the sea were caught? Moses couldn't see how, and I can't see how. But God's answer isn't so much about answering the how as it is about telling us to just trust him. In Numbers 11:23, God says, "Is the Lord's arm too short? Now you will see whether or not what I have said will come true for you." I don't know if Moses got a little teary-eyed when God said that, but I sure did, because I knew it was meant for me in that moment. I don't need to know how God is going to fulfill his promises and bring about the miracles that I'm asking for. All I need to do is keep my eyes on him and trust him. And sometimes it is frustrating because my limited perspective doesn't seem to line up with what he's saying. He's claiming to provide and heal and make a way, and I still can't see a way. But just because a whole month's worth of quail hasn't landed on my doorstep yet doesn't mean that it won't. It means God will be all the more glorified when it does. And it will. And that's what it's all about anyway. My desire isn't necessarily for a life full of miracles. My desire is for a life full of Jesus and the revelation of his glory. And because that is the foundation, there will be miracles along the way as well. May someone be inspired and God be glorified.